Well, hello everyone. Travis Tooke here.
Anthony Martinez here.
We got no script for the day, but I think there's some interesting things to talk about because it's a pretty interesting time. We mostly talk about martial arts, teaching, what we learn, how we apply the lessons of training, to life. But we just had a pretty crazy election that I thought we could have fun and hopefully stir up some controversy and some hate, and by the end maybe we'll be canceled. That should be the goal, right?
Well, I think our opinions are the most important. Person that voted for the first time and then someone that can't vote just yet. So I think we're qualified on this topic.
I think you know more than almost everyone.
Yeah.
Definitely. You know what I think I noticed the most about election stuff is just the concept that most of us are familiar with, which is called groupthink, which is I think it's very difficult not to fall into that pattern, which you probably know better than me, but that's why there's an electoral college, is to try to prevent. That's why we don't go by the popular vote. It's because when you're in a particular area, you're more likely to fall into the patterns of thinking that everyone around you is making popular.
Yeah, it's called like rule by the mobocracy. So like,
say that again.
Mobocracy.
How do you spell it? No, don't spell it.
It's mob, like rule by mob.
Okay, got you. Yeah.
So you just have a large group of people. So let's just say, for instance, that one state has most of a country's population. No, that's not here. But if they vote one way just because of influence and whatever it might be, they'll sway an entire election. But I think that's the idea behind the Electoral College. Well, all the schooling that I've gotten that's taught me that.
That's more than I know. But the little I know, that's what I understand, and it does make sense because, and I'm not immune to it. Much of our opinions are formulated by the people around us that are talking, and sort of telling us what to think, and if we're not looking at a situation objectively and challenging it. Because now to challenge certain ideas alone can bring about criticism, which I think is crazy. I think every idea deserves to be challenged.
I think you and I are the same, and like even if we agree with somebody, we have to look into it like, no, there's no way that they're right. Let me find a way to tell them that they're wrong. We're just like argumentative in that way.
Yeah. It kind of, I think the layman term is being a jerk, but it's true because I think it's the only and I'm grateful for this way of thinking, and jiu-jitsu has actually helped me with that a lot, because early on I learned a set of techniques from teachers who were of like a blue belt level, right? That's who we had available to teach us this new art in the late 90s. So there was nothing to challenge because there was only one way to do it. It was the one person who knew something you didn't know. As time went on, I would learn different ways, and then eventually I would learn very sort of abstract concepts in jiu-jitsu that contradicted one another, and I kind of didn't know. I was like, well, which one is right? I really want to believe my old teacher, but this guy's totally legit, and the way he's explaining it makes sense. And what I found was both were correct given a particular circumstance, and I'm glad that I adopted that mindset, because now I take almost nothing at face value.
Yeah. We were just talking about this a couple days ago, well, like a couple weeks ago, where I was telling you that you were showing a technique. You think you said it was Sasai.
Uh-huh.
And it was like I was 10, maybe 12. And
when you challenged it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you were showing the technique like, oh yeah, you have to make sure that you grab here, you do something with your arms. And I'm like, well, Sensei said to do it this way. Yeah. And now it makes me cringe so much now, but I like that reminds me exactly of that. Because I'm the same way now. I'm like, okay, yeah, because I've had kids tell me the same thing. I'm like, Coach Jose showed it this way. I'm like, well, yeah, there's a lot of ways to do
Coach
it.
Coach Jose ain't teaching you right now, boy.
Yeah, but just remembering that.
I remember that moment, and yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, little sweet 11-year-old challenging the way I'm doing the technique. And then you were like, I was like, well, who showed you? And you were like, oh, Sensei Ernesto, who is an Olympic silver medalist. And I was like, oh, well, he's probably right. And I think in hindsight, I've seen both versions of that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Technique. But I actually, the one that I lean toward was the one I was teaching. And then as I explored the other version, I now like that actually better. And I think that's very important. When you settle on an idea, it can be dangerous. And on a big political scene, it can be obviously dangerous when the whole world is sure that something is right and not willing to challenge it. On a small level, if you're not critiquing your own game over time, you're going to fall into a pattern of thinking that the old school is just the best way, you know, and there's some charm to that idea. There's something sort of comforting about knowing that the mentors that taught you many years ago perfected a system and all you have to do is repeat it. But it's just not the reality of any situation. Everything changes over time. There are new methods. Some things either get outdated or the way that you apply them, I think, changes. So what do you think about the elections?
I think it's really cool. I mean, I know now it's like, I wouldn't say necessarily like things are unfolding poorly. I think just democracy is going on as it does. But I do think it's cool that so many people went out and voted. Like, I'm sure everyone saw, it was like Joe Biden received the most votes of any U.S. president-elect. But then right below that is Donald Trump, who received the second
most ever.
Yeah, so it's like the most voted in election.
I was going to say, it was the most people voting ever.
Yeah, so it's really cool that like the political efficacy behind everyone, so like their want to vote is there. So like my dad, I had him register to vote for the first time. We were just talking about this. Hopefully he wanted to on his own and not just my convincing. But I think it's really cool.
You bullied your father into voting. That's hilarious.
I couldn't vote, so I had to do it by proxy. But I'm looking forward to next year where I can register to vote, and then in 2 years where I can actually vote, and then the presidential election in 4 years. But how do you feel having voted for the first time? Like, do you think you're going to vote again?
Yeah, I think I will. You know, it's something I've never done since I was ever, right? So when I was 18, I didn't do it, and I didn't care that much. And my people, my family and friends were like, "Are you insane? It's like your American duty." And I didn't really appreciate that. Nor do I appreciate it maybe as much as I ought to. But I sort of followed and got into it and decided, okay, I'll do my part. You know what I find so interesting about it is didn't really lean very. I'm not going to say who I voted for because then that's going to just start a bunch of comments. But what I'll say is I may be the least sure voter out there, which I think I think you shouldn't be entirely sure. That means you're basically certain of an imperfect person who's going to come in and solve problems that are going on. And while there may be some changes, the reality is most of many of our situation in life we've got to deal with. Whether the person you voted made it into office or they didn't, you wake up, you've got to go to work the next day, and the challenges of your life are going to continue, and you've got to face them and take a lot of responsibility for it. But it's hilarious because I have family members that feel one way and family members that feel the other, and friends, and they're some of them are so sure of themselves. They're so sure that one person is the reincarnate devil, and the other person is like the second coming, and it's like an apocalyptical scene. I'm like, well, there are in a way, there are just two people, and neither one's perfect. But I like the people watching element of voting.
Oh yeah, I like interacting with both of those sides. Like, I think I'm the same way. I don't think I would have chosen either one willfully and gone either way. But I really liked interacting with the people that were really for one side or the other, because I'm just like, even if I agreed with them on one part, I was like, I have to disagree with you because you think you're so right and you're so passionate about that. I'm like, I just have to disagree.
Well, and what's interesting is when somebody makes a statement like, how could anyone vote for this person? And it's like, well, it's like half the country on one side and the other. So it's unlikely that half the country is completely ignorant and stupid, and the other half have it all figured out. And what I would like to see more of, although it's maybe a little less entertaining, is people listening to the person who feels differently than them with an open mind and actually maybe questioning whether or not that person has any valid points, right? And so to make it like a jiu-jitsu example, like the day that you like challenge that move, right? Well, that happens in jiu-jitsu sometimes. People ask questions, or even like, oh, I went to a seminar with, this person and they did it this way. And I think a younger version of me probably would have said like, well, yeah, but we're not doing it that way. Almost allowing the ego to win the exchange, when the reality is it's like every challenge should be met. Every challenge should be met. Like, well, maybe it's true. Maybe this is a better way of doing it.
Yeah.
Or maybe this is another way, which that's almost always the case.
But yeah, so I think if you're steadfast in a set of ideas and you haven't really looked much into it, whether you're right or wrong, you aren't very knowledgeable in what's going on with the idea, and you haven't explored the other side. So I think that's something that I do a lot, jiu-jitsu or not, is just when I am looking at a technique or exploring an idea, I think I'm more often on the other side of it. So if I'm looking at a sweep, I'm like, okay, how would I defend this?
Yeah.
Or if I'm looking at a philosophical idea, I'm like, well, why does this matter? Or what can be the juxtaposition to this? But I think just a little bit more of that with our ideas that we hold dear and that are like at the forefront of all the news articles and all of that stuff is a little bit more valuable than just reacting immediately.
Well, it's almost certain that the majority of voting decisions, or maybe decisions in general, come from an emotional state, not a logical state. Because when we want something to be true, we'll bend reality to make it true. And so when people want to believe that somebody is all good or all bad, they'll gravitate toward the headlines that confirm that without reading the article and without reading the opposition's point of view. And so I would hope that, I don't know, I'm kind of doubtful. But I have a little pessimism as I get older, but I would hope that maybe a lesson that could be taken from this real volatile election is that when communication breaks down, everything else breaks down. And so I would hope that, that's what people say, like, let me just be friends with somebody who's on the other part, the other party, or somebody who's completely different than me. Mm-hmm. And before I try to show them why they're wrong, let me see if there's anything that they could actually teach me.
I think it's funny, like you said, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can read online that's either defamatory or confirms any belief that we had. But I think you can answer for me. But a lot of times people, what I see is like whenever they go into a decision or a voting, do you think that one thing really makes a difference, or do you think they had like a group of ideas or a group of media that they saw that really confirmed everything and they're like, okay, I'm voting for this person? Or do you think it's like they saw one article that switched their view and then it was like, oh, I can't vote for that guy, he's whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are very sensitive to individual ideas. So if a candidate doesn't feel the same as they do about one idea, that can be a deal breaker. But in general, it's just, I think, is a lot of confirmation bias. Mm-hmm. They want to love or hate someone. And so when they hear about something that perhaps shows that, hey, your golden boy is not so great, they just kind of look the other way. When they really ought to be saying like, all right, well, I didn't know that. That makes them a little less qualified, but maybe still the better choice. But I'm not going to ignore that. I'm going to calculate that in my decision-making process. But I really think that you almost have to, when it comes to like judging someone, you have to kind of sometimes remove the feelings you have about the first impression and see what do you think is actually going to happen. And that's hard to do because first impressions or just personalities can clash. It's very easy to understand why people hate Trump from a personality standpoint, and it's easy for people to not pay much respect, I think, to Biden because of his kind of, he seems a little bit slow-witted when he talks, things like that. But those are superficial compared to what you should actually be voting for. But we don't do that. We judge emotionally. How do we feel about this person?
I really like politics. That's something that I might go into. I am thinking about law.
Martinez for president.
Yeah, vote for me. But when it comes to kind of like the spectacle of politics, like the campaign slogans, the video clips of someone having a gaffe or whatever it is, I think, that's fun, like to see. I think if you're viewing it from the outside and you're like, oh, that was funny, I see that over there. But so in Congress, if you watched like the Amy Coney Barrett trial, not trial, Senate hearing, where they were confirming her or seeking to confirm her,
grilling her.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch.
There was cameras there.
Yeah.
So Congress people had the weight of a camera on them to kind of make a spectacle if they had the goal of maybe seeking higher office or making a name for themselves.
Yeah.
But then, like in the judiciary and the Supreme Court, there are no cameras.
Mm-hmm.
There are occasionally sketch artists that'll paint out the picture, but I think it's really cool if you've listened to sort of the arguments for both sides, like why there should be cameras in for the judicial branch or why there shouldn't be. It's like one side saying, "Oh, it's a great educational tool."
Yeah,
I think that's true, and then on the other side they're saying like, well, same thing. You're going to make a spectacle out of the judiciary process. And I'm not saying that necessarily is what happened in the Amy Coney Barrett Senate hearing, but I think it opens up the window to make things a lot more polarized. Because I hate that word too. Because at one point I was like, well, how are things polarized if just about half of the country is voting for one person and just about half is voting for the other side? But like what that means is just that the electorate, or the malleable electorate, the part that is actually swayable to one side or the other, is shrinking.
Right.
So less and less people are can either go back or forth. More people are set in who they're voting for. So I think that opens up the window to be a little bit more free in the way that you express ideas. Like you said, it's hard to sort of challenge an idea, even if you're just curious, without someone saying like, well, you can't ask that because.
Or like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's like
sometimes you just mean I'm curious.
Yeah, it's like. It's hard to not make someone uncomfortable whenever you're asking really important questions. Because it's important to someone, at least. Because if it's important, then someone values it. And if someone values it, then it feels personal whenever you challenge those ideas.
Right.
Same thing whenever you thought I was challenging your Sasai technique.
What are you talking about? I think I handled it pretty well, and then I went home and yelled into a pillow.
And it was like the one day that my dad came in, and he saw it, and I was like, God. And I think you had me do like 20 burpees, which is...
I didn't make you do burpees
yes,
for that.
You did.
Really?
Yeah.
So you deserved it then.
It was like, that part I didn't mind, but the fact that my dad was there, I was like, oh, God, I messed up.
He finally came to watch you, and you blew it.
Yeah.
Don't do that in politics.
Yeah.
They'll replay that clip forever.
Yeah.
Okay, so how would you solve the... This is your first challenge as someone.
This is a campaign
office.
video in a couple years.
It might very well be. That would be super cool. So how would you solve the camera conflict?
I don't know if it's necessarily a problem, making it a spectacle. I just think being aware of that is important. That's my view on just about. Any charade that's put on, it's like, well, understand where that person's coming from, understand what the intention is behind the action. So when someone says, repeats a campaign slogan as part of their questioning in a Senate hearing, then you're like, okay, that was a political statement.
Yeah.
And I think it should be taken as such. But I would say that's not necessarily the space for it, but I understand the politicking behind it. But I think that's why I like the judicial branch a little bit more, because it's less politics and it's just straightforward government. it's civics. You have your Constitution, and it goes by that.
Yeah. It's the behind the scenes that's the most important, but the least interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, least interesting.
Well, no, interesting to you, but in terms of people who are out there voicing their opinions on matters that they may or may not be, fully aware of, and they're certainly not aware of what's happening behind the scenes. They want to see the politicians butting heads.
Yeah, and again, political science experts here.
That's right.
This is our take on it.
I think we could fool a lot of people. we're using big words.
And I think moving forward, a lot of our ideas should be applied here. So you should vote for me.
So how do you do this? So you're going to be voted for one day, and you, I think you're saying what a lot of, future politicians think in terms of, I don't want to be that slogan guy that sells out. I want to stick to my values. But it's hard to climb that ladder without, I feel, not that I've, but I feel like a lot of these, how many politicians climb up that high that don't have a lot of dirt on them that they got while stepping over some other people and sort of cheating the system a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see some things as dirt.
Well, what a great answer! I prefer to call it sandy feet.
It's just a bit of dust you can brush off the top.
Great politician answer, Anthony.
But
and I endorse this message.
Yeah. No. But I think there are ways to climb the ladder quicker than other ways, but being in politics, there are a lot of factors that you have to weigh that are outside of yourself, because you have to get voted. You have to get voted in. So there's the elector, and depending on who you're representing, it's either a small constituency. So let's just say a representative. I think here is McCall. So he needs to make sure that he is sort of representing the ideals or everything that people in his district want. Yeah. If not, he's not being reelected. So he has that to weigh along with his own personal interests. Let's say he wants to seek higher office. Yeah. Then he has to seek out more high-profile either committees within Congress or whatever it might be. So there are those two balancing acts, and if you do too much personal interest, you're going to get voted out, and then you've lost your political power. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be selfish, but to be selfish in the right way that benefits others. Yeah. It's you could say that either of us are selfish for training 5 days a week or more, because we're spending so much time on ourselves. But then we go back and then we teach classes and we do all of that. But all the while when we're training, we're still helping our teammates, and it's really, it's like the word consequence. It's it has a negative connotation, what was the consequence of that action? It sounds like it's something.
The consequence, usually people think of
something bad, yeah. But a consequence could be either just the effect of something that's occurred. So I think that's kind of how I look at being selfish. It's there's a good type of selfish and then a bad type. There's a conceited.
Well, there's also, I think it's very important to, and this may be the most selfish idea of all, but I do believe you must take care of yourself before you're adequately prepared to help others. And I remember my grandmother, when she was alive, she was a very evangelical woman, very, very religious, very passionate, and just one of the best people I've ever known. And but into her later years, she never had a lot of money, but she would always give it to the worst preachers on TV, the ones that are going to be arrested for tax evasion the next year. She just couldn't get enough, of them. And I remember I was maybe save some of that, build it up, allow, create something that could grow, and then you could actually, do even more with it. And I think there's some personality types that have trouble with the idea. They're so giving that the idea that they ever put themselves first in any category, health, financial, personal passions, feels wrong. And so they just want to help others. And so, but they actually can never fully reach a point where they could maximize their ability, because they're always spreading themselves too thin. And so
So like that empathy and then lack thereof, something that I've always thought, and it's nothing that I've read about or anything like that. But do you think with age that kind of leaves? I know that goes against what you just said about your grandmother, but like with age, do you think that empathy kind of goes away? Because like when I see someone like on the corner, like my first instinct is like, oh man, let me give them some change or whatever. But then I've known older people. They're like, oh well, I'm sure they have the capacity to do work or
Sure.
They're not as empathetic when it comes to that situation in specific. But that's just something I've always associated. Like as you're younger, you're more empathetic, and then as you get older, you kind of lose that for whatever reason.
You know, I think the answer is yes sometimes, and it depends. You know, because I've read about that because I've known people, older people that are completely different than each other, and it's evident that some of them kept reading and learning as they age, even into their 80s. They're still learning and willing to change their ideas on something, and in many ways they could follow a conversation with a young intellectual crowd because they're with it. And then there's someone that clearly stopped learning at high school, adopted set views, and becomes more cynical over time because the world changes and it doesn't conform to their worldview, and that's a bad place to be. So I think the answer is it depends. It depends on the choices you make over time. I think it's natural as you get older, just biologically. You know, you slow down, and that can be a little frustrating, especially like I just like had this surgery. This makes me grumpy because I can't train, you know? And I'm like, well, you know, mentally I'm willing to work as hard. I'm willing to do all the stuff I did when I was younger, but now physically I've got to be aware that things are going to be more susceptible to. So I think there are changes that naturally make you a little more grumpy as you perhaps age. And it makes sense that as you get older, there's going to be more of those. Also, the longer you live, the more people and pets you know that are going to pass away. And that can be, you know, tough. When you're young, when you're young, the first family member that passes away, a grandparent or something, it's like you've never experienced that before. It's like, it's sad, but, you know, you kind of appreciate it. And as you get older, it kind of can become like, oh wow, there's another one. I'm getting older. People around us, you know. So I think the only antidote to that is you have to practice gratitude and you have to keep learning, because the more you learn, the more curious you are, and you always feel like a child at heart. But yeah, so there's your yes.
So old people are evil and pessimistic. That's what I gathered.
Yeah. And don't you tell me how to do that society, boy.
Yeah, that started your trend downward.
Pretty much. That's when my hair started thinning and this arm started getting weak.
Yeah, you hit it before I did.
Oh, well, always a dissatisfaction. I mean, pleasure.
I've only been on here 3 times. Not because you wanted me to, because nobody else would do it.
No one else would do it. They're like, you really suck at this. Get the kid. He's naive. He thinks you're good. Well, I don't know if we solved any world problems, but I thought this was pretty interesting.
I think we've enlightened just about everyone who will watch this.
That's like 9 people.
As the political scientists we are. But yeah, don't take our word too strongly. But I would say read a lot more. Even if you're already reading a lot, you can always read more. That's something that I definitely, when it comes to politics, 'cause it's just so much. That's something that I really like. Now, it just so happens to be that I'm in a government class this election cycle, so I think it works out perfectly. But I think like we hit it on the head. Like just continue to learn. We don't know everything. We barely know some things, but I'm
not sure if we know those things.
Certain things. I know he made me do burpees for the society.
And I know you deserved it.
But yeah, continue to learn. I think that's very important. I think watching these and making these is cool because it starts a conversation, and then you can go on and then look up anything that you'd like, especially now because you can just type it up on your fingers.
What do you think about that? Not that's probably another hour conversation that we don't have time for, but pros and cons at information at your fingertips in today's world.
I mean, overall, I think it's very beneficial. I think not going to an encyclopedia whenever you needed to know something, and then having that encyclopedia be dated, is a lot more helpful now, and not having to carry all those books. I think there's a lot of space for misinformation, and I think that's just the next step of. I don't think you get rid of that. Right. I think you just become aware of it, and it's. I think it'll get better and better and better, but I think there's. Right now an understandable reliability among certain sources, but I think on the opposite end of that, it's like since we know that information can be manipulated and all that, we're very critical when it comes to anything that we haven't seen before, especially if it goes against anything that we believe, like we've been talking about. Like if it comes from a source that we haven't necessarily heard of, but it might not be something that's attempting to misinform or anything like that. It's just something that we haven't quite seen. And like, oh, there's no way that's right because it doesn't confirm what I believe, and it's also from a source that I haven't quite looked into. Like, I think a good example is Wikipedia. Like, growing up in school, like, teachers always say, don't use Wikipedia, you'll find misinformation. But I think that's kind of grown out just because of the size of the internet and then just the use of the internet. It's like, anytime you Google something, go down a couple pages and you'll find a random article that doesn't make any sense.
I think the only the downside, I agree, is the potential for misinformation, but there's also, I think, and I know I'm guilty of this, is we don't respect, maybe as much as we should, generations that had to go to the library and had to wait for information. And we have it at our fingertips, and sometimes we just believe that here's the truth, it's instant. We can find out everything you learn in a lifetime in like 5 minutes by just finding any article that there was.
So you think that like appreciation of information?
I think the gratitude for it doesn't exist, and it should. I think it's one reason why, in many ways, this is the best civilization that's ever existed in terms of longevity and access to help and things like that. And but if you're born into it, you don't understand what it was like to be alive just a few decades ago, and anyone from a few decades ago doesn't understand what it was like to live at a time when people just had to survive. I mean, could you imagine like living at a time when you were going to probably die around 50 and it was going to suck? It was going to be a bad death, you know? Go back a couple hundred years, and so now it's just like, no, this is how the world always is. Catch up, older people, just be like this. And then they were like, no, it was harder for us to acquire information. If we wanted to, we had to go get a library card, and there were no like videos. You had to watch the one of two channels on TV. And so I really think, back to the previous point, what's very important, maybe more now than ever, is that you find time to just, I would say, maybe meditate or focus on gratitude, because gratitude was forced upon you back in the day when you had 8 kids and half of them died of disease, and that's just how life was. It just was like that. Now it's just like that's just such a rare thing to happen, and so I think that's what everyone can benefit from, and even the person who you politically oppose and hate will just have gratitude that somebody disagrees with you, and you get to have a stimulating conversation.
So we're a decade apart, roughly. So
thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah,
a little more actually.
Yeah,
and you know more than I do about almost everything, except for judo throws.
Yeah. So I'm just interested in this on the size, like. How was it when you were little? Like, what did you do to get information?
I just didn't do good in school.
That's why.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, pretty traditional. I wasn't an outstanding student or anything, so it was television, some reading. I mean, I didn't read much back then, and most of the information just came from word of mouth rumors that were mostly false, and you just come to believe these kind of urban tales, and then sometimes it wasn't until it was older, it was like, oh, that's not true. I can't believe it. I grew up knowing that, and generations before passed these ideas down, and maybe they started to protect kids, from something dangerous, and it became like just true in its own sense, and you have to find a source of information that challenges your long-held belief. But I'll say one thing to kind of just redirect a little bit. Well, one thing that was different was you appreciated time with friends, I think, a little more, because you didn't get to see them on FaceTime, and you couldn't talk to them on the phone whenever you wanted, and there was no internet. So you would see them at school. That's when you would interact with people, was at school. And then I had like my best friend growing up, like we'd get off the bus together, and we both had to go home, but it was like, hey, call me. And so we'd go home, and you had to get permission from your parents to wait for the landline to be available to call, right? And so you would just cherish that time because you knew it was fleeting. You couldn't do it forever. There was no texting. It wasn't even a thing that existed, And so you just had these long, like, conversations on the phone. Sometimes on the weekends you'd stay up till like 4 a.m. talking to your friend just about whatever it is that you're going through. And I think the clutter of everything today allows enough distractions that nothing is that appreciated in that way. Because if you're like my closest friend and we're talking and you leave, I can immediately distract myself with technology. And so although that might create more permanent loneliness, it's temporarily less lonely. So I think that's the difference. And adults aren't immune to it. You have adults like me and even older that grew up without a phone. They get one, they fall right into the same trap of, what can I do? What's happening today? So that was a big difference. I am grateful that I grew up with both. Because I agree, it's better that everybody is educated and that women in third world countries can see that there are other pathways, and they can be educated, they can learn that, whereas before it was not even an option. So all that's great, but I'm glad I had the time where I saw what it was like to not have that and try to blend those two ideas.
So you think you're better than everyone else?
I'm better than you, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think we've proven that we're both political experts and tech experts.
Yeah. I think we've solved all the problems of the world.
Just about all of them. I think one more video with me will...
yeah. Well, you're going to be my vice president one day. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I think it's enough. We should do another one. There's a lot more here. This is fun. All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you next time. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, don't forget to share this video with somebody else. Thank you.